the Canon C50 and the Nikon ZR. Both these cameras are recent cameras that became interesting to me and recently were announced and launched. Which one is the right fit for me and which one is the right fit for you for like a new cinema camera that might get you started? In this video, I'm going to compare the features of each of these cameras and talk about which one kind of fits for me, and I'll explain what type of videographer that I am, and perhaps that might fit for you. So we'll talk about that, and of course, take it from there, and I'll let you know which one I would choose if I were purchasing a camera. And I just might. If you're new to my channel, definitely consider subscribing. I'd like to talk about cameras, mirrorless and DSLRs for video specifically. And this is why we're talking about these two cinema cameras that I particularly am interested in, and they caught my eye. So let's get started. So let's start off with the Canon C50. It is a full frame new cinema camera that I think is actually the follow-up to the Canon R5. It does 7K open gate recording on its sensor, so finally we get open gate from the Canon library. And much like other cinema cameras, we get Canon Log 2, Canon Log 3, we get no IBIS, so there's no stabilization. And I know a lot of videographers prefer no stabilization because they want to control it themselves. At this point though, I will admit that to me, that doesn't really make much sense. I do like stabilization, and then when I can turn it off, I can. And I really have no situations where even like micro jitters are happening. When I turn off the stabilization and use my own stabilization, it just doesn't happen in my workflow. So personally, made for you, but personally, I would rather have IBIS. It's also got an internal fan, which will help for any overheating situations. And that's what you'll get with a lot of the Canon EOS cinema line cameras. You'll get that internal fans avoiding overheating because these cameras are meant for recording a lot of data and a lot of high quality heat producing data, which we'll get. But now let's move on to the Nikon ZR. What has it got to compete with when it comes to this lineup? So the Nikon ZR is full frame as well. And one of the standout features of the Nikon is the fact that it records not only its own Nikon RAW formats and RAW, and it records ProRes RAW, I believe, but it records Red RAW, R3D RAW. And that in itself is something major because after Nikon acquired Red, that was something that was talked about, and it was wondered, like, what are they going to do to kind of like work that into the situation of like Red cameras versus Nikon cameras. And the first step is to come out with a camera, a mirrorless design that can not only take pictures, but record in Red RAW. And that color science is legendary. But one of the other standout features is that it's got a massive 4-inch screen. Now this screen makes it almost like you don't need an external monitor to monitor what you're recording in itself. That 4-inch screen is really bright, 1,000 nits, I believe, but also big enough so that you can see the details of what you're recording and almost negating the need for an external recorder. Now it's a flip out screen, so it just flips out and you can see it in front of you, but it's not one of those multiple articulating screens where you could kind of tilt it while it's in front and then move it. Like Sony's got that down packed. But Nikon, no, they did a traditional flip screen, which again, isn't that bad. It's just, you know, could have been a little bit tweaked more for interesting purposes. But with that massive screen, a lot of your controls are like touch controls, and there are not so many buttons on the device because really, when you break it all down, it seems to be a little bit more basic of a camera and very tiny. Even though it's a powerful camera that packs a punch when it comes to image, you're not going to get that many physical controls as you would on the Canon or other cinema cameras. But one of the advantages to that is because it's so small, you can really work run and gun with this type of camera. If you're going to rig it, you can make a really small rig for it and then work with that, keeping it light, and of course, being able to shoot incredible footage with Red RAW, which is amazing in itself. Now, the advantages of the Canon C50 when compared to the Nikon ZR. Now, it's a little bit bigger, but sometimes that bigger body helps with weight distribution. And even though it doesn't have internal stabilization, you can still kind of hold it steady easier because a heavier camera will not produce like those micro jitters as much as you would expect. Plus, not only that, it's got an internal fan, whereas the Nikon ZR doesn't. Not that there's any really problems with overheating on the Nikon ZR, but you're not going to ever run into an overheating problem with the Canon C50 because of its internal fan. The other thing too that Canon kind of has as an advantage is the fact that it does open gate recording. I'm recording open gate right now as we speak, and this allows me to produce content not only horizontally for long form videos, but vertical videos for quick snapshots. And that's an advantage that you get without having to crop in too much. And Canon's finally offering that. And that's something that I've been wanting from Canon for a very long time. And now they're actually giving it to us. Whereas you won't get that ability on the Nikon ZR. And finally, the fact that the Canon C50 has a full-size HDMI connection, as opposed to the Nikon ZR that's still using micro HDMI. Like, who would do that nowadays? I mean, to be honest, I haven't really had an issue for most of the years using a micro HDMI connection, but it makes you wonder, we're in a world right now where a lot of these smaller cameras are still being able to squeeze in a full-size HDMI, and you'd wonder why Nikon couldn't do that, even though this is a much smaller body. Maybe that's why they couldn't. However, thankfully, they have a large screen that almost will negate the need for a monitor. So we'll see. Now, going over the strengths of the Nikon ZR, the first and the most important for me, which makes it so tempting, is the fact that they're using red code RAW. They're using red's color science because they acquired red, and they can do that 12-bit versus the traditional 16-bit red RAW that's in other red cameras. However, this is a great start, and the ability to match what you're recording to other red cameras, or if you don't own any red cameras, you can actually still get to become familiar with red's color science and absolutely love it. Now, this color science and the way that it records with this red RAW, you can't, for example, record H.265 with like a red log, right? You're not going to get that. You only can use it with red RAW in itself and then tweak it from there. Me personally, I tend to record RAW everything. I'm recording this in Blackmagic RAW. So for me, it's not a hindrance, but I know for many others that do not have the room or the space for recording RAW all the time, might want to, steer clear or avoid recording in RAW, and then they don't get the benefits of the enhanced dynamic range and beautiful color science of red. And then going on with the advantages, because it's so small, like I said before, it's so easy to make it a small rig and then just take it with you everywhere. And it's very discreet because it's so small, so you can just look like an average shooter, but you're getting RAW video with a red code and full frame sensor, and it would look amazing. So that's an advantage that you'd have with this really small body. And finally, that 4-inch screen, like I've mentioned a bunch of times, is killer. It's bright, it's awesome, it's huge, and it allows you to really see the quality of your footage right there on that body. And then once you see that screen, from what I've seen, it's like you can't work with any other screen. Now, on the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K that I'm recording right now, it doesn't flip out. But when I use that body and I'm recording something professionally for a lot of my clients, I don't hook up a monitor to it. First of all, one of the reasons is because the HDMI is limited to 1080p, so that's a struggle. But the other reason is the screen is 5 inches. It's so big and it's so bright that I don't ever really need to hook up a monitor to it. So with a 4-inch screen, which is comparable, you won't ever need to hook up a monitor to that as well, which you could just use that and then rig it with other items that you might want to rig it with and have the ultimate recording device in a really small body. I mean, that in itself is amazing. And I'm a fan of the red RAW too. Now, some of the downsides of the Canon C50, it's no IBIS, which I kind of touched upon before, which at this point, I believe IBIS would be so helpful even when it comes to cinematographers. This excuse that they don't need it or want it or it's a hindrance, With modern technologies, that's kind of less and less true. Another issue is no EVF. Now, EVFs do come in handy, right? Especially when you're outside and you want to look at your footage or keep the camera steady while you hold it close to your eye. It helps with stabilization. No EVF can be a little bit annoying. However, it's not that big of a nuisance. To be honest, a lot of times when I'm filming, I will not ever look at the EVF. It's very rare, and it's only when it's extremely bright. So I don't see that as being too much of a potential issue. And you can tell they were trying to cut costs by excluding an EVF, which they would normally include in their mirrorless lineup, like the Canon R5 Mark II, which I have as well. So some of the flaws of the Nikon ZR, some of the flaws include the fact that the battery and the cards are in the bottom of the camera are a little bit annoying. I do not like that interface. I like it when it's able to be removed from the side. From the bottom, maybe some tripods, it won't be much of an issue because it's still off to the side of the camera. But any of the tripods I know, it still may be a problem. And I find difficulty taking out the battery for my other cameras. So taking out the battery and the memory cards, not that I'm doing that often in shows, but it could happen if I'm running low on space. And that is a nuisance. The small body in itself, without many buttons, it feels very basic. So from a lot of the controls, you'll have to do it off of the touchscreen on the device itself. And it doesn't feel like it's really a cinema camera. It still feels kind of more like a hybrid. And since you only have one mounting screw on the bottom, if you put a ring system on it, it's going to be mounted off of that one screw unless whoever designed a rig system has other ways of securing it to the camera body. And that in itself is a little bit annoying, but it's still workable, right? But initially, the camera in itself doesn't feel like a cinema camera. It just feels like a tiny little camera, right? And even then, when it comes to being able to hold it steady and stabilize it, because it's so lightweight, doesn't really help. And of course, one of the things that I rave about a lot is open gate recording, which the C50 has got the advantage on there, recording open gate now, and they did not do that with this camera, which is okay, but like, missed opportunity. Maybe the next model. So now, which one of these cameras would I pick? Now, a little bit of background on me. I am in the Canon ecosystem mostly. However, I do have a lot of cameras shooting on the Blackmagic now. Had Lumix series cameras. I've had Samsung, which like nobody has. And then I have Canon models, both their DSLR and mirrorless lineups. So I'm tending to lean more towards the Canon when it comes to that family. I don't own, and I've never owned a Nikon camera. So that's that perspective. So you would think that I would lean more towards the Canon because not only because I'm in that family, but also because of the open gate recording, right? I would choose the Nikon because the Nikon, one thing I didn't mention, which is a huge advantage, is the price point is just over $2,000 versus the Canon, which approaches $4,000, almost twice as much, but not really. And the red RAW recording. I like open gate, but I've got it already. So if it's something that I have, I tend not to lean towards that. I have open gate. I don't have red RAW. And that's something that really interests me at such an affordable price. Now, there are sacrifices that I'd have to make in order to work with Nikon lenses. Maybe I'd get an adapter. Maybe I would get like the actual lenses. But that color science and that ability to record in red RAW is something that I really want to dive into. And it's something that I don't have, as opposed to a lot of what the C50 offers. I already have. I have open gate, which you're seeing now. And I have a lot of those Canon features in the R5 Mark II that make it very versatile. So I'm just looking for something different, something that I don't have. And I think the Nikon offers it for me, but it may not be the same for you. So that's my choice. That's my camera. What would you guys pick based off of those comparisons? If you had to choose one of these two cameras, let me know which one and why. We may disagree, but that's fine because we all have different needs. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think. Let me know your choice in the comments down below. And as always, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus. I'm out. See you guys next time.